Hey everybody, this is going to be a short video about 2 Timothy, kind of finishing up the last lecture that we just talked about with 1 Timothy and Titus. Little background on 2 Timothy. Within a short time, 2 or 3 years of his release from Roman house arrest, Paul was kind of rearrested, taken back to Rome. The thought is the cause of his arrest don't really know. Nero kind of blamed the burning of Rome in AD 64 on believers. Perhaps Nero knew he was one of the leaders of this new religion, and so Paul was targeted by him. Or perhaps Alexander, the coppersmith, brought formal charges against the apostle, either at Ephesus or at Rome. 2 Timothy 4:14, maybe. The place of arrest is also kind of unknown, but Troas is a good possibility because Paul left important personal possessions, cloak, books, parchments, stuff like that in the city. He may have been seized quickly, rushed away without a chance to contact friends or gather things. That's a possibility. Before he wrote the epistle, Paul had already given one defense of his position to the Roman court. Chapter 4 tells us that. Many of his associates had already left him for good reasons, and others had deserted him, Paul says. Chapter 4, verse 10 through 16. Talk about that. No verdict was reached at this first trial, not final, but Paul knew his death was probably coming. And he alluded to that in chapter 4 of 2 Timothy, verse 17, as well as verses 6 through 8, that his time probably to be alive was limited. Out of a concern for Timothy and a desire to see him before he would be martyred, Paul wrote his young associate to rejoin him at Rome. This book was Paul's last penned words. Paul wrote these words shortly before the apostle was beheaded on the Ostian Way, south of the city. What's the theme of 2 Timothy? Well, it's to carry on the work of the gospel faithfully. To carry on the work of the gospel faithfully. And Paul talked a lot about being faithful, and you see that in his words, talking about press on, preach the word in season, out of season. That kind of language was used by Paul here. When I think about 2 Timothy, I think about chapter 3, verse 16. It's one of my favorite passages. All Scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, correcting, and training in righteousness. Teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. So that's one passage I think about. All Scripture is given to us out of the mouth of God. Is what we see in that passage. I want to say that might even be a point of emphasis. It is, yeah. One of our points of interest here is that the phrase here in this verse, from the mouth of God, it's pasagraphe theophanastos. It means all Scripture is literally God breathed, breathed out. The words written by men are actually the words of God. What Scripture says, God says. I think that's why, come to the conclusions that Wayne Grudem does, and when he writes about his systematic theology, he says to disbelieve or disobey Scripture is to disbelieve or disobey God, because this is from His mouth. This is what He has said, and so just this book, other passages that I think I just want to read the last part of Paul's kind of instruction and encouragement to Timothy. It's an encouragement to me. It says in chapter 4, verse 1, it says, I charge you in the presence of God and of Jesus Christ, who is to judge the living and the dead, and by His appearing in His kingdom, preach the word, be ready in season and out of season, reprove, rebuke, and exhort with complete patience and teaching. For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths. As for you, Always be sober-minded, endure suffering, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. And this is what Paul says. These words are full of passion, and he says this, verse 6, "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure," that's his death, is come. I've fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing. And just think about that. Paul's finishing his last thoughts to one of his close friends, Timothy, a younger brother in ministry. He says, "Look, man, I'm about to breathe my last. My time on earth is almost over." And we talked about how in Philippians, Paul said it'd be better for him to depart and be with God, but it's more necessary that he remains. And he's come to the point where he's realized he's gonna depart, and that is exactly what happens. Paul his life is taken from him as a result of his faith in Jesus, and so he pens these words and says, "Listen, Timothy, I've fought the good fight. I've finished the race, and I've kept the faith." And so my word to you in light of that is very similar. It's a word of encouragement to those who are believers to continue in the faith during the difficult times, and to be faithful. And that's the ultimate goal for I think Christians. It's not about like success. It's kind of understanding what success looks like for a Christian is basically really how is determined by how faithful. So success is being faithful to the Lord, and what He's called you to do and be. And I think that's what Paul's saying here. I've tried at my best to be faithful. I'm about to pass away. I've fought hard for the sake of the kingdom and the gospel, and I know there's going to be a great reward in that, and there is for God's people. So there are rewards and glory that he's referring to here. So, anyways, that's sums up kind of 2 Timothy. So we walk through those pastoral epistles. 1 Timothy and Titus were prior to this one, and then this is 2 Timothy, the last portion of this lecture. Hope you are having a good day.